Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our office hour for today. So there are no questions on the sheets. So I think today we'll just very quickly go through some widgets in Flutter. And yeah, I would see how far we can go in today's class, just to go through some widgets really, and hopefully if there are questions after today's class, then we'll take them tomorrow. But for today, we'll just go through the basics of Flutter. So let me quickly share my screen and then we can get started. So this is the app from our last session. So we're just going to continue from here. Would go through a little bit about, a little bit on widgets, a little bit on, as much as we can cover in this class. So let's start from scratch. Let's take out all these here. Let's take them all out. And then we start, okay, we need to update tests, which we actually wouldn't need. So we can delete this for now. Then, I would start from here. So as usual, the first thing we would want to do is to create a main method. It's the starting point of our app, be it a Dart or Flutter application. This is always the point to start. So the next thing we'd want to add is the run app method. The run app method accepts a widget as its as an argument. So let's say we have practice app. We're going to create the widgets in a bit now. So I remember someone in the last class asked me the difference between a stateless widget and a stateful widget. The main difference between the two widgets, I mean, these are the primary widgets we have in Flutter. The widget is either a stateless widget or a stateful widget. And the main difference between stateless and stateful is states, really. So in a stateless widget, it's immutable in that once your app has been built, you can't exactly you can't change its states. It's immutable. Stateless widgets are immutable, while stateful widgets are mutable in that the states can be updated, can be modified as you make changes to your code or to your program, whichever. It's just like the sample app, or although I've played it now, we could do something like that in this session, just to see the main difference between a stateless and a stateful widget. Okay, maybe we should start with that. The difference between a stateless and a stateful. I should also share my emulator. Where is it? Okay. So right now it's broken because we made some heavy changes to our code, but we'll fix all that in a bit. So let me just properly position the phone and my editor. All right. So we're seeing this error because we have nothing going on in our main.dot file. Hence, there's actually nothing to run. So let's start out with creating the difference, with seeing the difference between a stateless and a stateful widget. So we start out with, let's just create our base class, which should be the practice app. And let's make it a stateless widget. In a stateless or a stateful, you're expected to implement the build method right here. And just as we have seen in other classes where in other sessions where we talked about classes, you know that if you're extending a parent class, you would need to override whatever abstract methods are inside of it. And in this case, we have the build method, right? Yeah, we have the build method right here, this abstract method. So what we do now is to override it, and then we'll build on it. So we first of all want to override, then we create the build method, right? Looking into the stateless widgets documentation, you see here that the build method accepts an argument, which is the build context. So we just want to add that here, and that kind of sorts out the issue. So we see here that it's warning us, the body might complete normally, causing null to be returned. We also talked about this when we're dealing on classes and functions, in that in a function that is returning a value, we cannot just have an empty body. We need to return the value that it is, expecting. If I go ahead here and return a string, this would not fly because the type string can be returned from the method build because it has a return type widget. So the same thing applies here. Since it's expecting a widget, we need to return a widget here. We need to only return a widget here. Okay. And also by standard practice now, we need to create a key. We need to create a constructor that has a key in it. And just by adding this line, we would sort out that warning that we're getting from Flutter lints. And like so. Okay, so this is a basic stateless widget. Let's just pass in a widget into it. Let's start with a scaffold. A scaffold is a material widget, and it helps us to add more like, so without a scaffold, your application is going to be very very bland. Let's see what I mean. So if you create a material app like so, and then let's refresh this. You see, we're having a black screen, right? We can go ahead to pass in a value, to pass in another widget into it, say maybe a text widget. And we pass in a value of Abbie, right? We see Abbie here looking with the red color and the yellow line under it. looking so somewhat really ugly. But we can change this by wrapping, like we can make it look not as though it's going to be a complete app, but we can make it look a lot better. Add all of the material design to it by simply wrapping this widget in a scaffold. And when we do that, even though I don't know if you can see Abbie right here, but it added this white background to it. Also, our text looks a lot better. We can bring the text further down by wrapping it in a safe area. So the safe area widget helps our widgets to not be obstructed by some system settings like, oops, sorry. With some system settings like the this top part of the app here, or by this button parts that's in most iPhones. It's also the same for Android devices. There's some devices that have some, features or phone properties that kind of block the top of the screen. So with Safe Area, you get to bring all of your widgets away from whatever might block it. Hence, our widget is starting here. Okay, so that's like the primary function of a safe area. So to find out more about widgets, you can just hover over it, and you're going to get the basic info about what that widget's doing, which we see here: create a widget that avoids operating system interfaces, which is this in this case, and also will be this if we have a widget getting to the bottom of the screen. Okay. Yeah, so we have seen a clear difference of when we do not have a scaffold and when we do. Yeah, we've seen a clear difference of the two of them, so we would leave it as so. If we were to just start out with, we would start out building our app and we just throw in a text widget inside here, we're going to get this error that says no directionality widget found. The main part of the error should be here. Typically, the directionality widget is introduced by the material app or widget app at the top of your application widget tree. So it's expected that at the top of your widget tree, you should have a material app. Just you should have a material app. You can't just throw in a material widget, a Flutter widget without having more like a foundation as to like where it's starting. So if you're starting with a material app or a Cupertino app, it has to be at the base or at the start, at the top of your widget tree, and then you can patch in whatever widgets that you want to patch in as you go on. So we have to definitely start with either a material app or a Cupertino app. And like this, it should application should run as normal. So this should be either Cupertino or material should be at the top of your widget tree before you can add anything else your application is most likely going to break. Will actually break, not most likely. Okay, so let's switch to it being a material app. The difference between a material app and Cupertino app is just the material app follows a design for, has material widgets, which are most likely, which lean heavily towards Android. And then you have the Cupertino app, which has Cupertino widgets, which leans more towards iOS, right? But you could also use you could use them interchangeably, in that you could have Cupertino widgets inside of your material app, or you could have material widgets inside of your Cupertino app. It just depends on the use case, on how best you want to structure your application. But for the most part, a lot of people actually do start the application with the material app, or you're free to test around to use whichever one would suit your the application that you're trying to build. Okay, let me go into the comments. Okay, there are no questions, so let's go on. Yeah, so we are just going to build off the sample Flutter application. Just something quite similar, right? Where we have a button that increases whenever you click on it, increases the number by 1. Yeah, we're just going to basically do that. And then we'll also use that as an opportunity to see the difference between state management with a stateful widget and a stateless widget. Okay, so there are also there are widgets that can accept multiple children, and then there are widgets that can accept just one child. So we have an example of a widget that accepts just one child, which is a container, for example. A container widget expects expects a widget as a child, but just one, as opposed to the column widget that accepts children. So you could put in a list of widgets inside of a column, and then we also have similar widgets as the list view, or the row, or the grid view. There are a couple of widgets that accept a list of widgets, and then there are some that just accept one widget as a child. So you should be able to tell the difference between the kind of widgets and how they are laid out on your screen. The column, for example, lays out your widgets vertically. A row lays out your widgets horizontally. For widgets like the list view, the grid view, you can state how you want them to be laid out. For example, with the list view, you can you can choose to, what's that property again? Yeah, the scroll direction. You can choose to have your widgets aligned horizontally or vertically. The point of this view is so that your widgets can be scrollable. So you can, it has the flexibility to allow you choose whether you want your widgets to be aligned horizontally or vertically, as opposed to a column and a row. Those ones are fixed. You have your widgets will be aligned vertically in a column and horizontally in a row. Those ones are fixed. These ones are flexible. Okay. So like I said, we're just going to recreate the what's it called? The sample Flutter app. So we want to have 2 widgets on the screen. Widgets that shows the counter we want to increase. The number that we're increasing, and then we also want to have a button, right? So let's start out with creating a column, because we are going to have multiple widgets. And then we have children. Then we would pass in first a text widget. This is going to take, let's just pass in a hard-coded number right now. We would adjust it later. We're just doing the basic UI right now, so we'll adjust that later. Then we also want to add a button. We could either use the floating action button, or we could just create our own button right now. There are multiple button widgets in Flutter. I personally, okay, I wouldn't say I have any preference, but yeah, we have different options that we could use right now. Let's just go with let's just go with the material button. We're going to flesh out the function soon. Let's see the properties that we have available to us. So it takes in a child. It has the color property, also has an elevation. We're just going to make use of the child widgets, the child property and the color, because we want to give our widget a color. So our child widget is just going to be a text. It's just going to be a text of click me. Yeah, then we're going to give it a color of, let's say, blue-gray. Then we are going to, what are the properties we want to use? Yeah, I think we're okay. Let's not go overboard with this, but I think we are good. Let's just leave it at that. Yeah, let's just leave it at that. Okay, so we want to move all these widgets to the center of the screen. Here we're going to use the main axis alignment. So the main axis alignment focuses on the axis of focus. Say our column focuses on the vertical axis, which in this case makes the main axis. So whatever changes we're making to the main axis alignments would make changes vertically. Here's what I mean. So if we set the alignments to center, all our widgets are going to move to the center of the screen vertically. Then in the column, the cross-axis alignment refers to the opposite axis, which in this case is the horizontal axis. So if we were to make adjustments to this and make it to align to the center, then we expect our widgets to what happened? We're supposed to see our widgets move to the center of the screen. Let me debug this right here to see. Oh, okay. It's what's the word? It's aligning the widgets to just this section of the screen right here. You see that I changed the cross axis end to end, and our text widget moved to the end of here that it's focused, and moving it back to center would put it at the center of this area of focus. So to move everything to the center, we'll just quickly wrap our column in a center widget, and it should handle that like so. You could also check out, you could also debug that situation using your widget inspector. At that point, if you're unsure what is going on, if you're unsure why your widget is not acting the way you want it to act, then you can just check to see, for example, the space that your widget is occupying or something. So without the column widget here, at that point where we were confused as to why it wasn't moving to the center, you just see here that our widget is just taking this part of the screen and not the entire width or the entire height in a sense. So whatever changes you're making to the widget is just going to happen within this area and not the other parts of the screen, if that makes sense. Not sure why that turned to a gray screen. Maybe it was because we changed our code. But yeah, you could always use your widget inspector to find out what's going on with your widgets, to be able to properly debug in case you have some issue with your, your widgets. All right, so we're just going to add our center back. So we place the widgets in the center of the screen. like so. You could also modify the material button has a ton of properties that you could use to make your button finer. So I could also change the color of, oops, you access the style. I'd also change the color of our text and make it white. At least now we can see what we have going on in there. All right, so this is stateless widgets. And if we were to carry out this increment, what we would first of all do is to create a variable. Is to create a variable with the, yeah, is to create a variable. Let's just ignore this for now. The first thing we want to do is to create a variable count and assign it a value of 0 because we want our counts to start from 0. So we'll come in here and we place our count variable in our text widget because this is the value that we want to update. Now, yeah, it's still showing 0 as expected because it's 0 that's assigned to it. We'll change it to 5, then do a restart. Then it would update to 5 and so on. So you see that we had to restart our application just so that we could see the small change that we made to the count variable. To change it to 0 again, would have to do the restart, and then before we get to see the updated value. So that's, just note these things about the stateless widgets, and then we'll see the difference when we switch to a stateful widget. Now we want to, what we want to do when we click on click me is to increase count by 1. So we simply do count plus, right? This is what is expected to happen whenever we click on the, whenever we click on count. And if we to go ahead to print count, let's open the terminal. We're to go ahead to click to print count whenever we click on the button. Ideally, we should see it incremented. So if I click on this, we see that count is increasing. We see the number being updated in the console, but right here, we're still seeing 0. Our value is still 0. That's because it's a stateless widget, and the state of this widget cannot just update on its own. A stateless widget is immutable in that now that we've already built our app, like we've run the app as we can see here, and whatever changes we're making inside of this application cannot be swiftly reflected here because, like I said, it's stateless, and a stateless widget cannot just change its state. It needs, its state cannot just be changed. So you could have a stateless widget in the case where you may not be using, any state management tool. You could just use a stateless widget to maybe create reusable widgets that you can get to pass values into or something. But in the case where you have an interactive app, a basic stateless widget like this would not be able to do the job because whatever changes you're making inside of your app would not be reflected as the user interacts. Like you can see, I'm clicking the button. It's clear there's an increment going on, but we can't see what's going on right here. So that's like a clear difference. We see having to reload the app. That's the time that we get to see the updated value, which is 22. If I carry out an extra, click me, I reload the app, then you get to see the updated value. So this is a stateless widget in a nutshell. And if we were to upgrade this app, okay, maybe not upgrade, but if we were to change this into a stateful widget. So if you have if you have the Flutter extension installed in either your VS Code or Android Studio, you have access to all of these shortcuts. I could very easily create this stateful widget from scratch, but it's not all the time that you'd actually want to do everything from the beginning to where you want to be. So you could use all these shortcuts to help make things easier. If I were to click on this, convert to stateful widget, it's going to convert our stateless widget into a stateful widget very easily without us having to do anything extra. So let's make use of it. We have our stateless widget back. We have our stateful widget now. Yeah, of course, it's going to break. We have to restart our app for this to take effect. Okay. So now that we've converted this to a stateful widget, what we want to do is to update the state to rebuild our app anytime this counter increases. So the one way we can do that inside of a stateful widget, we have access to a method a method called set state. If you hover over set state, you see that it notifies the framework that the internal state of this object has changed. So the set state is somewhat a notifier, and whatever update we're making inside of a state inside of the set state rebuilds the widgets that's concerned. What do I mean? So we have this count plus plus. We're going to move that increment into the set states, and then whichever app has this value in it, whichever widget is related to this value that we're updating would be updated alongside it. In that, when we're incrementing this, the count variable inside of the text widget is also going to be updated as we carry out our increments. So if we're to click, we see here that our number is increasing as we're clicking, because this set state is updating, notifying the framework that, hello, there's a change going on. Please update yourself based on the change that's going on. And hence the text widget that houses this count variable is being updated every time that we're incrementing this count. So if we're to change this, for example, to increase counts by 5, or whatever it is that we're updating this count widget to, if we're doing click me, it's going to increase by 5. Now, yeah, exactly. So this is the clear difference between a stateful and a stateless. In a stateful widget, you can update the state of your widgets. They're mutable in that you can make changes, but for stateless widgets, we cannot just update the state because they're immutable. Stateless widgets are immutable. Okay, in here, today we've covered the basic difference between a stateless and a stateful widget. We've covered some types of widgets that are available to us in Flutter. In fact, you see the scaffold, the safe area, the center, the column, the text. Those are primary widgets that you find yourself using in most of the applications that you get to build. We also have the container widget as well. That is also very, very common in literally almost all Flutter applications that exist. We've also gone through what main axis alignment and cross axis alignment, what they mean. So if I were to ask that if there are people who are ready to interact with me in the comment section, If I were to ask if this was a row, the main axis alignment would focus on which axis? Is it the horizontal or the vertical? If I were to replace this column with a row, will the main axis alignment be, will it be the vertical axis or the horizontal axis? Can anyone try? Thank you, Robert. Yes, it will be the horizontal axis, while the cross-axis alignment will focus on the vertical axis if this were to be a row. All right, so I think I've covered quite a number of things in this session. And tomorrow we would, if there are no questions, we're most likely going to go into, talk about navigations, talk about imports, and just, explore the materials that were shared for week 6. So yeah, tomorrow we're going to cover all those things and more, right? So thank you all for joining today's session. Thank you all for being a part of this. If we do have time, we could also go through assets and images. So tomorrow we'll go through navigations, we'll go through imports, we'll go through assets and images, and anything else that our time permits us to. But we're going to keep our sessions going forward short, except if there are questions that are asked that we need to cover. All right, so thank you all so much for joining today's session. It was a pleasure. So I guess we get to see ourselves tomorrow.